Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I want to look at the weekend of February the 10th and 11th, 2024. So my apologies, I didn't really want to talk about Ukraine again in this video. I mean, I just talked about Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin, and they were talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or as the Russians call it, the special military operation. I should have had a break from Ukraine. But things have been going on in Ukraine which I think we need to look into. In particular, Zelensky has fired the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, General Zaluzhnyi, and he has replaced him with someone else, General Oleksandr Syrskyi. And this is, I think, quite major because it's indicating that you've got a power struggle. It was very difficult for Zelensky to fire Zaluzhnyi. In fact, the Deputy Secretary of State recently, Victoria Nuland, had to come in to fly into or go by train. However, I don't know how she gets to Kiev. She had to go to Kiev to maybe sort the matter out, and so it was a bit of a problem. And so you've got this potential here for a sort of a factional struggle with Zaluzhnyi and Zelensky vying with each other. And I've already looked at Zelensky's chart. He had a full moon on his birthday. He's just had Pluto opposition his Mars. Pluto opposition Mars really does give an indication of a power struggle. And so I think it would be a good idea to look at Zelensky's chart and look at the kind of struggles that he's currently involved in, because I don't really think it's going to get any better. I think this may just be the beginning. And I also wanted to look at the charts of these two generals, General Zaluzhnyi and General Syrskyi. General Syrskyi, we don't know so much about him. I mean, Zaluzhnyi has had quite a big profile. But what about Syrskyi? I mean, he's interesting because he was actually born in Russia. He's actually a Russian originally, and so he's now he made a decision to I suppose in 1991 to go with the Ukrainian armed forces and become a Ukrainian rather than a Russian. So that's kind of interesting, and I think the view is that Syrskyi is more likely to do what Zelensky wants. I think that Zaluzhnyi was popular in the Ukrainian army, and he perhaps had a reputation for looking after his soldiers. But Syrskyi is not popular. Syrskyi has got a rather checkered military past. He very much associated with the struggle to hold on to Bakhmut. That Bakhmut being that town in Donbass, which is a real meat, they use the word meat grinder to describe what was going on. I think he made a mistake in the 2014-2015 war involving Donetsk and Luhansk, the militias there, and I think there is a view that he didn't pull out fast enough of somewhere, and either 3,000 men either got killed or captured. I don't know what happened. He does have a certain reputation, General Syrskyi, for not looking after his troops and sort of pushing them forward into meat grinders. And I suppose now that Syrskyi is is commander-in-chief, he's more likely to do Zelensky's bidding, and Zelensky is really keen to hold on to this town of Avdiivka, which is sort of northwest of Donetsk, and the situation in Avdiivka is desperate, and I think they're planning on now sending reserves there to hold on to it at any cost, whereas Zaluzhnyi wanted to retreat. And so I thought it would be a good idea to look at Syrskyi's chart and ask ourselves, is there anything about this chart that indicates this is someone who doesn't look after his soldiers, that pushes them into meat grinder situations? Because I looked at this chart and it's actually quite interesting. So I suppose some of you might not be interested in Ukraine, but I assume you're interested in astrology. So when you look at these charts, whether it's the royal family or Ukrainian generals, you shouldn't worry too much about who the person's chart is. It's really about astrology. It's about getting examples of how astrology works. And when you've got a situation as massive as the war in Ukraine, things happen quickly, and this is perhaps a good opportunity to see astrology in action. But before I look at Ukraine and Zelensky and the generals, I want to do the sort of astrology and I Ching for this weekend, which is the weekend of February the 10th and 11th, 2024. So top right, that is Oleksandr Syrskyi, and I will be talking about his chart quite soon. But now let's see what's happening this weekend. So on Saturday at 1:42 p.m. London time, the moon moves into Pisces. So this chart, by the way, represents the very beginning of Sunday, February the 11th, sort of midnight, as Saturday switches to Sunday. And so, London time at 1:42 p.m. on Saturday, moon goes into Pisces. If you're in New York, it's going to be earlier. It would be at 8:42 a.m. If you're in New York or Los Angeles or Vancouver in Canada, then it's going to be even earlier. It's going to be at 5:42 a.m. So that means that if you're in the Americas, you have got the moon in Pisces, all day long, really, unless you get up early in the morning. If you're in Western Europe, well, the last half of the day you'll have the moon in Pisces. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, really you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait until Sunday to see the moon moving into Pisces. So, as far as the big aspects are concerned this weekend, there are two major aspects, or aspects which I regard as being major. One aspect is an aspect between Mercury at 9 Aquarius and Jupiter. So Mercury square Jupiter. So Mercury is the communication planet. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, perhaps not knowing when to stop. So with Mercury square Jupiter, some of us might talk too much. I mean, that's literally what it means. Mercury in Aquarius has got ideas, wants to talk about them, doesn't know when to stop. So that is a possibility. Also, we might have thoughts which we can't stop. Mercury is the thinking, Jupiter just goes on and on and on, can't stop thinking. So that is that's one way this Mercury square Jupiter aspect might work, and it's it's going to be quite stubborn, I think, and a little bit insensitive. So even though the moon is in Pisces, which is a nice, sensitive, emotional placement for the moon, this Mercury square Jupiter, we might talk a lot, we might say things, and we might just not pick up on what's going on at an emotional level. So we might do a lot of talking and be completely embarrassing ourselves and just not really see it. Everyone else can see that we're talking too much, but not us. So if you are doing a lot of talking today, ask yourself, is it really necessary? And, perhaps you're wasting a lot of energy. So don't say more than you have to with this Mercury square Jupiter. And if you're talking to other people, you might really want to stick to one point. There may just be one thing you want to keep talking about. Remember, Mercury is in Aquarius, which is a fixed sign. Jupiter's in Taurus. That's a fixed sign. So it may be just very difficult to get off the subject. And we might see the same thing in other people. Just people talking too much about the same thing and they just won't shut up. So that is one manifestation of Mercury square Jupiter. And for some signs, Mercury square Jupiter could have an impact on relationships. I'm thinking particularly of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces, maybe even Taurus and Aquarius, but certainly 4 or 6 signs. Relationships are going to be important, and with that square, for many of us, relationships have to be handled correctly because there's going to be a certain feeling of incompatibility. I'm not talking about major fallouts here. This is a fairly fast-moving aspect between Mercury and Jupiter, but it's just a feeling that us and other people, we're not quite on the same wavelength. And so that's certainly something that needs to be considered. Another aspect we've got this weekend is a semi-square between Venus, there you have Venus at 23:15 Capricorn, and Saturn. So Venus semi-square Saturn. Venus is a planet of relationships, but it's semi-square Saturn. So what does that mean? It seems that the ability to relate may be a little constrained. Some of us might find it difficult to let go, perhaps because we're concerned about other things, like money, for example. After all, Venus is not just a planet of love, it is a planet of money. And we have to be careful about how we show our concerns about money. However desperate we are, it's usually the case that if we make too much of a thing about money, we go on about it and we reveal our financial insecurities. We could not only embarrass ourselves, but actually people might think less of us. So today money has to be dealt with a certain amount of caution. Now, as far as the midpoints are concerned, this Mercury-Jupiter square that I've talked about is aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So Mars and Uranus as a pair, I think I've already discussed this, recently. Mars and Uranus as a pair are quite accident prone. And so, with Jupiter aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint, we want to get involved in stuff, and we're not really thinking about the dangers. Then Mercury is aspecting this Mars-Uranus, the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Mercury is perhaps just acting as a trigger. just it's a time when we exceed ourselves, when we go over the top, and as a result we do ourselves an injury. That's possible. Or we cause damage, we cause arguments, we cause turmoil. That's also a possibility. And Mercury square Jupiter, as I've said, is about talking too much. And by talking too much, we aggravate people and the whole thing gets out of control. So do bear that in mind, because really we don't need things to go out of control, do we? It's a weekend, we need to relax. So really avoid the temptation for talking too much, because I don't think it's going to be helpful, and it could backfire. Okay, so that's a broad astrological picture. I suppose I should also point out that the moon is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter this weekend. It's a fortunate aspect. So if we can avoid talking too much, and we can perhaps focus on sort of non-verbal signals, just being ourselves, but perhaps getting close to people, but without talking too much, then I think we can have a measure of success and comfort this weekend. We can actually get really close to someone who we perhaps haven't had anything much to do with in the past. So that's something you might want to think about. And it's all about it's non-verbal communication. It's not about verbal communication. So, with Mercury square Jupiter, we just have to be reminded of that. Yes, Mercury square Jupiter might want to talk a lot, but I don't think that's really very useful in at least many cases. Okay, so that's a broad picture, and so what I want to do now is look at the do my star sign forecasts for the weekend, which is the weekend of February the 10th and 11th, 2024. Aries. In many respects, it's a weekend where you aren't really in the mood for, having a wild time. You might feel that you've got limited amounts of energy, and at the same time, you may be more sensitive than usual. You're sort of picking up a lot of things from the world around you, things that are quite complicated, and you don't really feel that it's the right time for sort of wild socializing, or, for example, going to parties and things like that. You might feel that the best approach is to keep yourself to yourself. I'm not convinced that such an approach is advisable, not least because you'll be missing opportunities. I think this weekend, you can get on with people extremely well, and in quite a surprising way. Through surprise, you can form a set of very useful contacts with another person, or indeed with a group of people. I don't know, it depends what you want, but the opportunities are certainly there. So Aries, don't assume that other people are useless, because I really do think that they have got something to offer you. Nonetheless, a lot of a weekend can be spent on your own, because in many respects this is where your best work is going to be done. It's going to be done when you're away from other people, when they're not disturbing you. And because I suppose you're quite sensitive, and if you're surrounded by other people, you're going to be able to pick up on what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and it might just all be too much. And proximity to people may actually just slow you down. So don't feel obliged to spend all weekend in other people's company. Just don't go over the top with the solitude trip. A bit of solitude, fine, but too much solitude, and you may be in a situation where you are simply wasting energy. Now, as far as your social life in general is concerned, I mean, it's still important to you. It's just that you haven't got what it takes to see everything through. And if you spend a lot of time with a lot of people, you're going to start to realize how completely useless things are. That these people are not really helping you. In fact, they could be slowing you down. So yes, you must be aware of that. And another point to make is that other people could be expensive. When you're with other people, there are temptations to spend money, and it may be difficult to refuse them because it just seems to be the right thing to do. But I do understand that Aries, if you're an Aries, you try your hardest not to worry about money, and you try your hardest not to appear concerned about money. And so in order to give that impression, you may feel you have to go along with the crowd, and in the process you could spend more than you were actually expecting. Aries, this weekend, really things should be done on your terms. You should make sure that whatever you're planning, you don't assume that other people know what they're doing. Don't assume that other people are going to be considerate. So find out what's happening and make sure you just get the balance right. Yes, a little bit of socializing would be great, but you do need time on your own to make the most of your potential. Taurus, it's another day when you are fairly ambitious, or rather, when I say another day, I'm talking about Saturday and Sunday. This weekend, you clearly have things that you want to do. You don't want to be held back. You might take the view that if you wait until Monday, you'll miss your chance. So, many Taurians, again, they're going to have a busy weekend, or at least they're going to want to have a busy weekend. But there may be an issue that there just isn't enough to get your teeth into. There just aren't the challenges, aren't the opportunities, and so maybe you should consider focusing on something else. Don't discount the possibility that friends and socializing can be a very useful part of your life, not least because the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. So Jupiter is a planet of good luck, moving through Taurus, your sign, and the moon is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter. Indeed, the moon is in Pisces, which is in the sign of Jupiter. Jupiter is in Taurus, which is the exaltation of the moon. So the moon and Jupiter have a comfortable relationship with each other. And I think your enthusiasm and your dynamism can really move your social life into orbit, or at least parts of your social life. And not everyone, but there are just certain people who are just going to make a big impression on you, a fortunate impression on you, and this could be the basis of new friendships. So that does look good, and also you'll be very good in general at making new contacts. Trying to listen to what people want, and being able to give it to them, and so that creates a basis for new contacts. As far as one-to-one relationships are concerned, we can't ignore the fact that Venus, which is your ruler, is semi-square Saturn. Semi-square, that's a 45-degree aspect. And this could make certain relationships difficult. It just may be difficult for people to express themselves in the way they want to express themselves, and there may be a certain feeling of repression, people not able to express their feelings, and that could upset you. But maybe the challenge with Venus semi-square Saturn is that in your life there seems to be something that needs to be properly organized, and you're not organizing it, and that's part of a problem. Taurus, I think you've got to address yourself to that, and just see what you can do. Gemini, I think today, Gemini, you are in many respects quite ambitious. I mean, today, there is a conjunction, this weekend. This weekend, you are quite ambitious. The moon is in Pisces. When it moves into Pisces kind of depends on what time zone you're in. But in a general sense, there is a conjunction between the moon and Saturn today. And the moon and Saturn are in quite a high-profile sector of your chart. So that means that Geminis this weekend are actually able to work pretty hard. I know it's a weekend. People aren't supposed to work on a weekend, but you can work on a weekend. And if you do try to work on a weekend, I think you're going to be able to accomplish a great deal. But, Gemini, you must bear in mind that there are limits to how much energy you've got. Especially with Mercury making a square aspect to Jupiter. Mercury is your ruling planet, and it's square Jupiter. One way of seeing Mercury square Jupiter would be about Gemini's talking too much, Gemini's being too agitated. So that is something you've got to be aware of. Don't take on too much. Don't take on, lots of different obligations. It's not going to work. Ideally, you'll just focus on one thing, and that is the way to go. Now, this square aspect between Mercury and Jupiter it could have an impact on relationships, and you and someone else just might find that you haven't really got what it takes to really relate to this person, at least today, because you and another person are approaching a problem or a set of problems or a way of being in completely different ways, and your different approaches are not complementing one another. They are almost at odds with each other, and so to deal with that problem, Gemini, you are going to require you'll be requiring a lot of self-discipline, and a further problem is that Mercury has Mercury and Jupiter, which is Jupiter is making a square aspect to Mercury. Mercury and Jupiter are both aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So Gemini, you do have to be careful. You could overreach and get yourself into a situation that may be very difficult to get out of. And you need to be very careful with technology. You also need to be careful with machinery and driving. Be extra careful, because driving, you could just push things too far. I don't know. You could go over the speed limit. risk having an accident, whatever. So yeah, just take it easy, Gemini. You don't have to achieve everything at once. And perhaps you need to focus on things that are constructive, like business and your career, because it does seem to be the case that there are certain things that you really can do. Cancer. I think Cancer, it's quite a forward-looking and expansive day. You can see the possibilities, and I understand that Cancerians can be very cautious, but today you can see what is possible. I think you can actually see that many things are possible. Things are possible that you perhaps didn't realize, could actually happen. So don't doubt yourself, and also don't doubt other people. Other people can be a big resource today. They can really help you to achieve your aims. Especially as there is a conjunction between the Moon and Saturn. Now, you might think, Moon-Saturn conjunction sounds a bit grim, Saturnine, but remember, in the Cancerian chart, your star sign, Cancer, is ruled by the Moon, and your opposite sign is Capricorn, and that's ruled by Saturn, and the opposite sign is connected with relationships. So the Moon-Saturn conjunction represents you and someone else being together. How long for? I don't know. Perhaps that depends on you. I suppose if someone is too heavy, too obsessed about responsibility, too into, telling you that they're better than they are, then of course there could be problems. But you do have to evaluate the situation and act accordingly. Leo. There are people who are influential and powerful. These may be the kind of people you want to associate with or need to associate with. Don't ignore your social life because you could meet important people. As I said, people who could be extremely helpful. But at the same time, don't spend too much time on your social life because if you spend all day with other people, talking to other people, you could reach a stage where you just feel pretty wiped out. So Leo, I think you ration yourself in terms of your social life. You can only give people so much of your time, and when you've had enough, you'll know. But having said all that, I do think that you can make contact with important and authoritative people. So, trust yourself to be able to make those connections. I think you know how to go about it. And you certainly can't be a hermit. Because otherwise I think you would not be making the most of the opportunities that as far as I can see are very much available to you. So really that is the picture today. As far as, I suppose I should say a little more about relationships. Relationships could be a bit strained. I think perhaps because from an emotional point of view, you may feel a bit swamped. There's just too much emotion, perhaps, if you get too close to any one person. And it's complicated enough dealing with your own emotions. Compared to but then having to deal with other people's emotions as well, that may just be intolerable, and that might not be something you want to get involved with. You want to perhaps work on your own feelings, and there are things that you need to work through. And I think that approach is fairly reasonable. Virgo, relationships are quite difficult to avoid this weekend. The moon is moving into Pisces, your opposite sign. So if the moon is moving into Pisces, your opposite sign, then this is a time when relationships are really difficult to avoid. And you are going to have to deal with people. Now, I don't think this is a real problem, because once the moon has moved into Pisces, it starts making a sextile to Jupiter. It also starts making a conjunction to the Sun. But that sextile to Jupiter is pretty fortunate. I mean, Jupiter in many respects represents the other person, and so with that conjunction to Saturn, it's kind of saying, if you want to get close to another person, Saturn is saying, well, there are a few things you do need to do. You have to be properly prepared. And it may not just be another person. There may be a situation that you want to get involved with. It's something that's important to you. But before you just go storming ahead, you have to consider what is required of you. Because there certainly are preparations that need to be sorted out, and you've got to trust your feelings. Now, another aspect today, and I think it's this weekend. Another aspect going on this weekend is a square aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. So Virgo, Mercury is your ruler. And Jupiter can represent another person. So it does seem, Virgo, that there is a person out there who you perhaps need to be in touch with, but at the same time, you and this other person are not going to fully get on. There's like a clash of personalities. You just don't quite have the same priorities. So Virgo, you need to consider this very carefully. There's someone who can certainly be helpful, useful, someone you need to get to know, but you could so easily mess it up. Firstly, I suppose, consider which people you really need to get in touch with this weekend. Once you've worked that out, then perhaps you need to do a bit of work on yourself. You need to be properly prepared. I do think that is going to be important, and preparation in general is going to be important this weekend. It is a weekend where hard work will be rewarded, and even if that hard work is really bores you to tears, you don't want to do it. You just want to stop, go to sleep, whatever. That hard work, it is going to be satisfying. But you do have to have a bit of patience, and the patience perhaps comes from doing something and in the short term not really getting any reward. So it just does take a bit of time before you're able to benefit from what you're doing. And that time, that gap between where you started and where you get the first benefits, you may be quite vulnerable, because there's a danger you might give up on something because it's boring. But really, I would not recommend that course of action. Libra. Yesterday I mentioned that you're pretty creative. You can get things done, but you can get things done that are fun, and that was because of the new moon. And there was a lot of ways in which you could enjoy yourself, and I mean, hopefully you took advantage of everything, because now things have changed. Yes, you are still incredibly creative, but there's a bit of emphasis now on bringing it all together, having to put in the work. Creativity on its own isn't enough. you have to make sure that whatever you've been working on, it stays, that your efforts don't come to nothing. And so that does require some hard work. And it may be quite boring, and it may be unsatisfying. But if you just keep working at it, then I think that soon enough you will start to see the benefits. So I'm not saying that you have to spend the whole weekend getting involved in hard work. It's just something, you know what it is. It's just something that needs to be finished off, and it just may take a few hours of your time. But while all this is going on, I think your social skills will be good, even though your approach is perhaps more serious than it was yesterday. But your social skills will be good, and you can actually be really quite dramatic. You can really push forward with your agenda, and you can tell people who you are and what you want in a fairly blatant way. And once people know who you are and what you want, they'll be in a position to evaluate you. Now, some people might say, no, this is not someone they want anything to do with. But if you are really clear about what you want, I think there are going to be other people who really think you're great, think that you can, make their lives a lot better. So, Libra, just consider that, and consider what you might need to do. But don't keep everything to yourself. The reason I say that, Libra, is because Venus is your ruling planet, and Venus is making a semi-square to Saturn. And so with Venus semi-square Saturn, some Librans might feel sort of restrained, as if something is holding them back. And, your ambitions, which relied so much on free flow, might suddenly be jeopardized. Or at least they may appear to be jeopardized. But I think what's really going on is that there is an area of your life that needs some work. You need to really sort it out. You don't want to sort it out, but I think that you can definitely benefit from sorting it out. Scorpio, you feel that whatever you're doing, it's not quite enough. You need to push yourself just that bit harder. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to work super hard. It's not really about hard work. It's about finding something that is you. It's got to be you. It's got to be a genuine expression of who you are and what you want. And that's something you got to look for over the weekend, Scorpio. And in the process, you may have to be quite stubborn. It's not about a popularity contest. Sometimes getting what you want requires you to step away from other people and their concerns and their worries, because it's. If you get involved with someone else's concerns and worries, you might lose sight of yourself and your interests. And you definitely have interests. There are things you want to do. If other people want to join you, that's fine. But if they don't want to join you, that's not your problem. And, with today's Moon-Saturn conjunction, I think you can structure yourself very well, and you can really bring out some of your talents, and so that is certainly something you can do, and something you should be aiming to do. Now, looking at relationships, I think you are quite a powerful, charismatic person at the moment, and Scorpio, I think that you can get closer to people. And, the question is, how do you get closer to people? One way to get closer to people is to spring a surprise. It's got to be the right kind of surprise, but if you need someone's attention, a surprise is the way to do it. And if you're subtle and you craft this surprise in the right way, then as a result of the surprise, you can find yourself, getting much closer to someone, and perhaps it's the beginning of a new relationship, or alternatively, an old relationship which was perhaps getting a bit stagnant, can suddenly take on a new lease of life. Sagittarius, you were quite communicative, and you were, quite busy and enjoying people's company until very recently. But this weekend, I think you may be slowing down a bit. I think this weekend you may feel that you need more space. You want to be able to construct your own reality in your own way. And so, Sagittarius, you may feel that you have no choice but to, slam down the shutters and exist in your own little world. That's fine if you want to do that. But there are some people you do have to engage with. I mean, for example, your family. They want to talk. You've got something to say to them. You may be in a position where you can give them some good advice. So do consider that possibility, Sagittarius. And I think another reason why you might be a little wary of the outside world is other people. I think what you've got here is you've got a square aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. So Jupiter is your ruling planet, but Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. And so that is telling you how a relationship is going to be working. And it does seem that you and someone else do have a difference of opinion, because Mercury and Jupiter are square with each other. So it's a question of how you manage this difference of opinion. Do you talk it through? I mean, that is a possibility. The disadvantage about talking through differences of opinion is that sometimes by talking them through, you may actually realize that this difference of opinion is much greater than you originally thought. And it may just be better to just accept differences of opinion, but not to make, not make a big deal about them, not feel you have to talk endlessly about them. And that way, these differences of opinion will sort of resolve themselves in a natural and organic way. But it just can't be denied that today, Sagittarius, there is something about you, though, that is very hasty. You want results, you want them now. At times you may not care too much who you offend. So if you're not careful, you could rush into a situation, cause a lot of damage, cause a lot of bad feeling, and then you don't really know how to resolve it. You've started a situation, but you don't really know how to finish it. So Sagittarius, I think a lot of careful thought is required today. And every time you've decided that a particular approach is, it's the best thing to do, give it some more thought. You don't have to be in a hurry. Capricorn. Well, I think you're in a position where you are able to say what's on your mind. A lot of things are on your mind. And this weekend, people are going to listen, and you can explain what's bothering you, and that is something to be welcomed. Once you explain what's bothering you, in a polite way, not in an angry way, if you can do that, then I think the response is going to be very fortunate. And I think you'll be helped by the fact that there is a conjunction between the moon and Saturn. Saturn is your ruler. Saturn rules Capricorn. The moon rules Cancer, your opposite sign. So you might be able to interact with someone who you may have a difference of opinion with them. You may have a difference of opinion. But just because you've got a difference of opinion doesn't mean that you can't actually take advantage of this other person who you have a difference of opinion of. When I say take advantage, I mean, use their knowledge and experience and advice, because I think it could be very helpful. But I think Capricorn, you do need a certain amount of responsibility, and you need to understand the impact that you're having on certain people, because your impact could, in certain cases, be quite destructive. Destructive because you may be limiting someone's freedom, or you may be being overcritical. I mean, that comes with the fact that the moon is conjunct Saturn. Moon is ruler of your opposite sign, Cancer. So when moon and Saturn are conjunct, Saturn may be leaning too heavily on the moon. So, you need to give people space and not be overly critical, unless you really know what you're doing, unless it really is appropriate to be critical. Aquarius. The moon is now in Pisces. It depends where you are, but over the course of Saturday, the moon is likely to move into Pisces. Of course, that depends where you are. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, it's going to be later than if you're in, say, California. But with the moon moving into Pisces, I think there is an emphasis on Aquarians' money. You're trying to stay aware of money, but there could be moments where you sort of lose awareness, and when you lose awareness, you can spend too much money or commit too much money. So you do need to be a bit careful there, and probably you need to put yourself in a position where you can't spend money. Maybe this is a time, Aquarius, if you're going out, you should perhaps leave your credit card at home, or give yourself a strict budget. And I think you can stay within strict budgets, Aquarius, because this weekend there's a the moon is conjunct Saturn. Saturn can be a bit boring and overly responsible, but you need to internalize this Saturn and perhaps place constraints on yourself, and so make sure that you're not overspending. And I think that's something that you can certainly sort out. And another thing, Aquarius, there may be moments over the weekend where you are just not all there. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're half asleep. Maybe you're thinking about something else. And during these moments when you're not all there, it might be quite spiritual. You might almost have a blank, and you may be propelled into a different dimension. That's one possibility. But it may just be that you're vague and foggy. When you're vague and foggy and you don't quite know what you're doing, and in that place where you're vague and foggy, you could make mistakes. So make sure you're not in a position where you're going to make mistakes or make false assumptions, or just make commitments that you can't fulfill. So especially be careful about making financial commitments over the weekend. I think Aquarius, you might live to regret them unless you've really done a lot of research, unless you really know what you're doing. Pisces, well, the moon is in your star sign. Okay, depends where you are. If you're in the Americas, this morning, on Saturday morning, the moon moves into your star sign. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then early Sunday morning is when the moon moves into your star sign. And so when the moon moves into your star sign, you're feeling comfortable. You're feeling that you understand what's going on around you on an emotional level, and because you understand what's going on, you're in a position to move forward. Especially as the moon is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter. Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, and this may mean that you can perhaps communicate in a way which is very fortunate. Maybe it's all about delivering an important message. So what is that important message that needs to be delivered, Pisces? Right now you do have the capacity to construct that message properly and to make sure that it reaches the right people. So if you've got something to say, Pisces, don't hold it back. Looking at relationships, and the main aspect today is a square aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. So Jupiter's your ruler. Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, your opposite sign. So we kind of get the symbolism there of you and someone else don't see eye to eye. So if you're in a relationship, if you're communicating with someone on a one-to-one basis, it might be a good idea to stick to non-controversial subjects, because there are certain subjects where you just might not agree with them. And once you hit a disagreement, it may be difficult to keep control of things, because one disagreement could lead to another disagreement, could lead to another disagreement, could lead to some serious incident. So Pisces, if someone is important to you, then maybe you should avoid controversial matters. Of course, if someone isn't important to you and you don't care, you want to get rid of them, you've had enough of them, then by all means, you can be as controversial as you like. You might get rid of them, but you'll have your say. And that's what matters. So Pisces, do consider which people you're offending and which people you're disagreeing with, because you don't want to create a situation that you weren't really planning on. And furthermore, Jupiter, your ruler, is actually it's aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So Mars-Uranus is quite a troublesome pair. It can be about using one's energy in the wrong way, or it might be about disruption. And so, you can actually be quite disruptive if you want to be. But it's easy being disruptive, but it's not quite so easy putting it all back together once you've caused the chaos. So if you want to be disruptive, make sure you're disruptive in a place where your disruptiveness will be appreciated. If you're disruptive, in a place where everyone is expecting peace and quiet and harmony, then you're not going to make many friends. But I think you know all this, Pisces. You're very sensitive. You understand people's likes and dislikes. You're not going to make that kind of mistake, are you? Okay, so those were my forecasts for the 12 signs. And so what I want to do now is look at the I Ching. So as always, I asked a question, and the question, was, what is this weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And I threw the coins, 3 coins, 6 times, and the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 3, difficulty at the beginning. So we're engaged in a project. We're engaged in something that's important to us, probably on Saturday, and straight away we run into problems. It just doesn't work out. And so there is then the question of what we're supposed to do. Now, we don't have to give up, because it's only difficulty at the beginning. It's not difficulty at the ending. And so a little bit of hesitation could go a long way. We hesitate, and then we possibly stop what we're doing. Just take a pause and maybe get some help, because people are available who will help us to understand what's going on and get over this difficulty. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we have to bring them into our home, for example. We can possibly call them on the phone, explain the situation, and then they might have some ideas. What do they say? Phone a friend, that kind of thing. So don't be afraid to reach out and get some advice if you do run into a problem, and don't be impatient. When you hit a problem, it's just so easy to just keep going and end up making a complete mess of it. Better to just pause what we're doing, get some help, get some advice, and I think in most cases that advice should be very good. And this logically moves to another hexagram, and the hexagram it moves to is hexagram number 8, which is holding together. And holding together is a very sociable hexagram. It's about meeting people, being with people. It's about union. It's about people coming together to solve a collective problem, which is what I was saying at the beginning when I was talking about difficulty at the beginning. So that's what it is, difficulty at the beginning. Over the weekend, we're going to confront something, and to begin with, it will be difficult, and we're going to find it difficult to sort it out. But we'll get some help, and through this outside help, we'll be able to solve the problem, and perhaps we'll be able to bring new people into our life who can help us to understand what's going on. And through collective harmonious action, we can end up having a very constructive and even profitable weekend. Okay, so now I want to go back to the Ukraine, and I do apologize for this. I didn't really want to talk about Ukraine today, but I talked about it a bit yesterday, or I certainly talked about Tucker Carlson in Moscow, but what's happened, I think is quite important if you think about it. If the commander-in-chief has been sacked, why do you do that? I mean, I think people like to use a sporting analogy. I hate sporting analogies. In America, that's one of what I really dislike about America, is people using sporting analogies to explain things. But I suppose if you had to use a sporting analogy, those questions about how well Ukraine is doing in this war. the Western mainstream media is suggesting it's maybe not doing too badly, and at least not disastrously. Or they're kind of really accepting there are some cracks in it. But if your sporting team, if you're, I don't know, a team in the NFL and you've just won your last 6 games, you don't sack your coach, do you? Or if you take a British soccer approach, you could say, well, if you're a football team, a soccer team, and you're playing in I don't know, the Premier League, and you won your last 6 games, yeah, you don't sack the manager, do you? But in this case, Ukraine is sacking the manager, and Zaluzhnyi has gone to be, who was the commander-in-chief, and he's been replaced by Oleksandr Syrskyi. So I want to start, I think, by looking at Zelensky's chart, just to remind us what is going on. I've looked at his chart, very, very recently. So apologies if I'm repeating myself. But here is his chart. He's the one character in this drama that has a time of birth, and you can see that Zelensky has a conjunction between the Sun and Venus at 5-6 Aquarius. So on the 25th, I think there it is. There's the 25th. That was actually Zelensky's birthday, January the 25th, 2024. There was a full moon at 5:15 Leo. So in other words, that full moon was hitting his Sun-Venus conjunction. And what is a full moon? It's about the truth. It's about seeing the picture for what it really is. I mean, at least that's what it should be. Although an alternative might be, I suppose, if you're president of Ukraine and you are completely attached to your position. I don't know. Sometimes you think that he's overly attached to the role. Sort of like, Vivian Leigh was attached to the role of, what's her name, Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. But so if you're over attached to the role, then you can't see the truth. You just keep ploughing on, and I suppose we have to remember with Zelensky, I suppose we have to remember he's got a lot of planets in fixed signs. I mean, I think perhaps any normal person, with this full moon, with all that's going on in Ukraine, would say, well, this is a complicated situation, in over his head. If he doesn't sort of back out of the presidency, bad things can happen. But he's so fixed. He's got so many planets in fixed signs. He's got Mars in Leo, Moon in Leo, Saturn in Leo, Sun in Aquarius, Venus in Aquarius. 5 of his 7 traditional planets in fixed signs. And so he's stuck on this path. He's stuck on this way of seeing the world, of this way of fighting the war. And so he hits this clash with Zaluzhnyi. Zaluzhnyi wants to, I believe, pull out of places which he regards as being undefensible, like he wanted to pull out of, I believe, Bakhmut, and he wanted to pull out of Avdiivka, this place sort of northwest, I think it's northwest to the west of Donetsk city, and he wanted to fall back to a more defendable line. But Zelensky is not about giving up territory. Then that is the fixed sign. The fixed sign wants to hold on to every square meter you have. And I think that was part of the clash. Although at the same time as this full moon, Pluto went into Aquarius. So Pluto goes into as it goes into Aquarius, it straight away makes an opposition to Zelensky's Mars. And so Pluto opposition Mars is about a power struggle. And so he's not only about issues with the war, but there is a power struggle, and he's getting involved in a power struggle with, I suppose, different factions in Ukraine and Kiev. And part of that power struggle is his struggle with Zaluzhnyi. And so there are all these efforts. It took him ages to get rid of Zaluzhnyi. Zaluzhnyi didn't just leave when he was asked to resign. He just held on for as long as he could. So that Pluto opposition Mars plus the full moon is really kind of indicating the sort of issues that Zelensky is having to deal with. And when you've got a full moon on your birthday, on your solar return, and you're president of Ukraine and the war isn't going well, that full moon is a sign, hey, this is the truth. But somehow Zelensky's not fully seeing the truth, I don't think. And I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I think maybe it's the fact that he doesn't have any water in his chart. But he's got Uranus in Scorpio, but that doesn't really count. Or that Neptune in the 7th, he's deceiving him. He's got Neptune on the 7th house cusp. I think that Neptune on the 7th house cusp, I think he's quite good at deceiving other people. But at the same time, he's quite good at deceiving himself, playing a role, and at the same time deceiving himself through that role. And so, believing that somehow if he wants to defend, to keep Bakhmut or keep Avdiivka, I'm sure I haven't pronounced that properly. If he wants to keep these places, he can do it just by saying he's going to do it, and by having a general who's prepared to commit himself to it. That's okay, but it's probably not okay. So I wanted to look at, to begin with, Zelensky's relationship with Zaluzhnyi. Very quickly, I don't want to spend too long. Synastry is, in astrology, that's sin with an astrology. It's looking at two charts to see how two people relate to one another. Well, actually, I should look at Zaluzhny's chart first. So this is. Hold on, let me just. Whoops. Yeah, that's General Zaluzhny's chart, and he's just been sacked. I don't have a time of birth for him. You can see that he's a Cancerian. Some Cancerians are very good generals. Julius Caesar was a Cancerian. I think Alexander the Great was a Cancerian. I don't think that he's quite at the level of Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. But it is true he is popular amongst his troops, and I think indeed in the Ukrainian population. And I suppose you could say that Sun in Cancer, one of the fortunate manifestations of Sun in Cancer is loyalty. Cancer is your clan. It's your group. He is loyal to his group. So perhaps he has a certain amount of loyalty to his troops, and he does care about their well-being. That would be a Cancerian. Cancerian is Cancer is quite sort of nurturing in that sense, but he's also got Sun square Uranus, and so that does create a certain amount of instability. He's quite, but it's also quite quite impulsive. So there's Sun square Uranus, and I would have said quite stubborn. But maybe he's sort of sensitive to the Sun-Uranus cycle, because I don't know the exact time of the sacking. It seemed to be about 6 p.m. on February the 8th, but I'm not sure. You can see that at the time of the sacking, the Sun was square Uranus. So maybe Zaluzhnyi was sensitive to that cycle, but that aspect between the Sun and Uranus. Now, as far as how Zelensky got on with Zaluzhnyi, so we'll put so inner wheel is Zelensky, and we do know his time of birth. Outer wheel is Zaluzhnyi, the general he has just sacked. The synastry is quite interesting. The first thing is the Jupiter and Saturn connection. So Zelensky has his Jupiter at 27.9 Sagittarius, Gemini, and Zaluzhnyi has his Saturn at 27.05 Gemini. So Zaluzhny's Saturn is on Zelensky's Jupiter. So how would we interpret that? So Zelensky's Jupiter, he has all these great ideas. Jupiter in Gemini, though, Jupiter doesn't actually work very well in Gemini. It tries to sort of to have a vision, but that vision is broken up by all these details, and it has to deal with these details, and it's just not entirely fortunate. So Zelensky has these ideas. Let's hold Bakhmut. Let's hold Advika. Let's do this. Let's run our war like this, and then maybe we can make a breakthrough and maybe capture the Crimea or something like that. So he has these ideas, and Zaluzhny's Saturn is right on his Jupiter. So Saturn is like pouring cold water on it. So I can imagine Zaluzhnyi having to explain to Zelensky why certain things are not realistic and not going to happen. Zaluzhnyi is a soldier. He knows about how these things work. Zelensky is an actor. He's an actor kind of pretending to be a soldier. But he is an actor. And so we can see how Zaluzhny's Saturn might be trying to put Zelensky right. And maybe Zelensky doesn't appreciate it. Also, there is the question of Zelensky's Sun. So Zelensky has his Sun-Venus conjunction in Aquarius. Again, Sun in Aquarius, having some wonderful ideas. And there is Zaluzhny's Mercury in Leo. Mercury in Leo is opposition Sun in Aquarius. So that's a real clash, isn't it? The way Zaluzhnyi communicates, and Mercury's in Leo, it likes to communicate quite proudly. He sort of believes in himself. That's how he communicates. That it doesn't really work with Zaluzhny's Sun. So this might explain why these things might explain why they had this clash. It's just that they just find it difficult to communicate, and Zelensky's ego doesn't like being told the truth. And I think so. I think that might be what's going on. And it's not just the fact that Zelensky's Sun is opposition Zaluzhny's Mercury. Zelensky has his Mars at 0 Leo. So Zelensky's Mars is conjunct Zaluzhny's Mercury. So there's another point of clash. Zelensky's Sun-Mars opposition is hitting Zaluzhny's Mercury. And the way Zaluzhny communicates really annoys Zelensky. And so, this really doesn't help, does it? So those are a few thoughts about the synastry between Zaluzhny and Zelensky. One other point, we had this full moon on July the 25th at 5 degrees Leo. So 5 degrees moon at 5 degrees Leo, sun at 5 degrees Aquarius, and it's right on this piece of synastry between the two. There's Mercury at 3 degrees Leo, Zaluzhny's Mercury, Zelensky's Mars at 0 degrees Leo. Then you've got the Zelensky's Sun-Venus conjunction. So the full moon was not just hitting Zelensky; it was also hitting Zaluzhny's Mercury. So perhaps that explains why something had to give. Of course, there is a view that it wasn't Zaluzhny that was going to give; it was going to have to be Zelensky that was going to go. I still think that he's in big danger. This is not the ending of it. Just because he's got rid of Zaluzhny, all his problems are over. I don't think so. Then we have to consider another person who was affected by this full moon, and this is Zaluzhny's replacement. So Zaluzhny's replacement, General Syrskyi. I don't have his time of birth, but he is now the guy in charge of Ukraine's armed forces. Now, at first sight, it's not particularly amazing. I mean, he's a Leo. Now, from a military point of view, Napoleon was a Leo. That's... Leos can be good generals. From what I can see, from what people are saying, Syrskyi doesn't seem to be a good general. He was sort of connected with the last year's offensive around Kharkov. We know when the Ukrainians took back, Izium and Liman and Kupiansk, those places around I think over in the Kharkov Oblast. And so he was associated with that. But as I said, he was also associated with a real disaster in 2014-2015 war when I think he should have pulled out of somewhere. I can't remember where the place was. Up to 3,000 Ukrainian troops may have been killed or wounded. I'm not sure which. He's also associated with Bakhmut, where he just held on when he should have got out, and he's just seen as someone who doesn't seem to care too much about throwing troops to their death. He doesn't seem to have that sort of caring view of his troops that Zaluzhny supposedly has. I'm not sure whether this is true or not, but this is what people are saying. And so, Syrskyi is not popular, as far as I can see, amongst the Ukrainian army. And apparently a lot of Ukrainians are really not happy with the fact that Syrskyi, of all people, has taken over from Zaluzhny. So in terms of his chart, he's got the sun in Leo. So because he's got the sun in Leo, that sun in Leo is conjunct Zelensky's Mars. It's also opposition Zelensky's sun. So although Zelensky has just appointed Syrskyi as the commander-in-chief, I think there's plenty of scope for the two men to fall out. I mean, in a way, I'm kind of surprised they haven't already fallen out. And, maybe the clue is that maybe Syrskyi is, we don't have a time of birth for him. I mean, he is originally from Russia. Maybe he doesn't have the connections in Ukraine and the family history in Ukraine that others have. And maybe he he feels himself to be more vulnerable, and maybe he finds it easier to just do what he's told by someone like Zelensky. He just has taken the decision he's just not going to cause any trouble. I mean, that is possible. And I suppose if he's a sun in Leo, maybe he's someone who is quite vulnerable to flattery, and the whole everything that goes with being a senior officer in the Ukrainian army. It all appeals to him, and so maybe he just doesn't feel he has to stand up for his men. And of course, another irony of the thing is that he was originally trained in the Soviet Union as Russian, and so he's kind of behaving with his meat grinder thing like a sort of typical Russian Soviet general, not caring less about human life, like Second World War general Russian Soviet general sending waves and waves and waves of men to their deaths. So that's kind of a bit ironic there. But can we actually see that in his chart? Well, I think we can. First of all, I do want to point out though the full moon on January the 25th was not just hitting Zelensky's Sun-Venus conjunction. It was also hitting his Sun, because his Sun is at 3 Leo, and the full moon was right on Syrskyi's Sun. So that full moon had an impact on him. So what is the issue? Where do we see someone who has the capacity to cause a lot of death and destruction, if we believe what people are saying? What would we look for in his chart? Well, I think we might start off by looking at his Mars-Saturn midpoint. There is his Mars, there's his Saturn. You can see that you can maybe see it by eye, actually. Can you see that Mars and Saturn are reflected on each other? If you reflect it through the 0 degrees Capricorn, 0 degrees Cancer axis, you can see that the reflection if you reflect Saturn through that axis, it's on the same position as Mars. If you reflect Mars through this axis, it's on Saturn. This is like Mars and Saturn, in using traditional astrology, are on each other's anticia. Or to put it in a more modern way, the Mars-Saturn midpoint is square the Aries point. So he has got Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And people who have Mars-Saturn, just remember, the Mars-Saturn pair can be about death, widespread death. That can be one way of working, of Mars-Saturn works. It can be about death and destruction. That's certainly possible. Zelensky has Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. If Zelensky had an agreement in Istanbul with the Russians in the spring of 2022, there's an argument to say that maybe 300,000 Ukrainian lives would have been saved, not to mention the Russian lives. But he carried on, or there is a view that he was pressured by NATO and particularly by Britain and America not to do any deal with Russia. And given what's going on now, that deal that the Russians were offering at Istanbul was pretty good. They'd almost come to an agreement. So Zelensky, through his stubbornness and his, just completely getting into this role of being president, almost generalissimo, a lot of people are dying because of that, and that is Aries on the Mars-Saturn, Aries hitting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Likewise with Syrskyi. He has got Aries hitting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so what I want to do is just show you that midpoint from a perspective of the 90-degree dial. So this is Syrskyi's chart. And so this is the 90-degree dial. Basically conjunctions, squares and oppositions are shown as conjunctions on a 90-degree dial, and semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions. So what I want to investigate here is the Aries point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the dial up to the Aries point. So you can see that he has actually got Hades on the Aries point. Just show you let me show you what where his Hades is. So Hades is a hypothetical planet relating to death, destruction, criminality. His Hades is at 1455 Taurus. So in other words, Hades is 45 degrees from the Aries point. So in other words, he's got Aries, and Hades are aspecting each other. So going back to his going back to the Aries point. So remember, the Aries is the world. Every Aries point represents the world at large. Or if you're a leader or a senior, a senior official in a country, it represents your country. It represents all those people and what's happening to all those people. Not just the Aries point is a personal point, but it's not just the individual. It's kind of the world at large. And you can see that he's got Hades. Yeah, there's his Hades, which is a 45-degree aspect in the regular chart, but on the 90-degree wheel it comes over as an opposition. And so there is Mars and there is Saturn. And in fact, you can see that Mars is creating a symmetrical relationship between Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus. So you've got his Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus on one hand, got Mars on the other, and it's all on the Aries and Hades midpoint. So you can see what I mean by this Saturn, Uranus. Let's just simplify this chart. So there is his Saturn. So he was in the mid-60s. There was this opposition between Saturn and Uranus, and opposition Pluto as well. And so this represents one complex in his chart: Saturn opposition with Uranus Pluto conjunction. And so on a 90-degree dial, you've got Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto on one end, one group, and you've got Mars on the other. So if you like, the Aries point creates a symmetry between Mars on one hand and his Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto on the other hand, and not just the Aries point, but the Hades as well. So now you can start to see. Why this is really such a terrible signature. Hades in 45 degrees from the Aries point, making this symmetrical axis, and you've got Mars reflected onto Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus, and so that's a problem. And I think we can now see why Syrskyi has got such a bad reputation. Why he is seen, as being someone who sends his troops to their deaths, why he's been so associated with meat grinder tactics in Bakhmut, and now there's a fear that he's going to do it again in Ardvika by this commitment not to let Ardvika fall, sending in new reserves, and I think given this chart and given the political situation in Ukraine, the whole thing looks pretty catastrophic, and I suspect that he is the wrong person, and his chart, I think, certainly indicates this. Now, one thing about Syrskyi which is problematic is we don't have a time of birth. Now, I would suggest that when you don't have a time of birth, it can be useful to look at the lunation before birth. So he was born July the 26th, 1965, in the Vladimir Oblast, which is, I think it's in east of Moscow. Let's find the right one. Yeah, so this is the full moon before he was born, which July the 13th, 1965. So I would argue that when you have got important people, like generals, yesterday I talked about this with relationship to Vladimir Putin. When you've got really important people, particularly if you don't know their time of birth, the lunation before they were born can actually start to behave like a personal chart. And if you look at this chart, this lunation, you look at Mars. Mars was exactly square. It was exactly square the ascendant. So Mars is in a very elevated position. It has a sort of 10th house feel to it, although it's in the 8th. It does have a 10th house feel. The reason, of course, that you've got this massive distance between the midheaven and the descendant is because this is it's very far north, relatively speaking. So as you go north, the Placidus house system starts to break down. This isn't a breakdown, but it's starting. That's one of the arguments against using the Placidus house system. But he does have Mars square the ascendant, and I think that is quite telling. There is another thing about this lunation before he was born. Let me just show you. This is a full moon just before he was born. Let's have a look at the hypothetical planets. So there's a sun and the moon. Is that there is a hypothetical planet called Zeus. Zeus is about explosions, gunshots, big bangs, and Zeus is exactly sesquiquadrate, semi-square, the full moon. Exact. There's no orb. Zeus is at 6.4 Virgo, which is exactly 45 degrees from the sun, exactly 135 degrees from the moon. And so 45 degrees is 1/8 of the circle. 135 degrees is 3/8 of the circle. So having Zeus on the Sun-Moon midpoint in his prenatal full moon is I think that's quite telling. That is someone who is perhaps attracted to the military. attracted to all that military equipment, explosions, gunshots. That's what Zeus, yeah, because that's what Zeus is about. So yes, that's perhaps why he got involved with the army. But I'm not sure if Zeus is really working in a particularly fortunate way for him. Now, one other thing I want to say is that, well, actually two other things I want to say is that just before this appointment took place, or just before Zelensky fired Zaluzhnyi, the Assistant Secretary of State in the US flew into, or I don't know how she actually got to Kiev. She probably didn't fly all the way, but she came in from the US and she visited Kiev. That was, of course, Victoria Nuland. So Victoria Nuland is someone who's been closely associated with Ukraine. When Ukraine overthrew the elected president in 2014, it was Victoria Nuland's. She had a big hand in it. She was in Kiev at the time. She's famous for giving out cookies to protesters. The Maidan revolt, and we don't know. She's probably got a lot of power. She's like she tried to mediate, it's like just a reminder that Ukraine isn't really an independent state fully. It is a proxy of the US. It's a kind of an American client state. And so Victoria Nuland, in some respects, she has she may be trying to influence what was going on and so forth. So yeah, so she flew in. Now, as far as Victoria Nuland's horoscope is concerned, there are two things about this horoscope. Firstly, Victoria Nuland has her Jupiter. Now remember, Victoria Nuland, by the way, was born on July the 1st, 1961, which is the same day as Princess Diana. Very different women. Jupiter, Victoria Nuland's Jupiter is at 5-7 Aquarius. So that means that the full moon on the 25th of January 2024, it was hitting Zelensky's Sun-Venus conjunction. It was hitting Zaluzhny's Mercury at 3 Leo. It was hitting Syrskyi's Sun at 3 Leo. And it was also hitting Victoria Nuland's Jupiter at 5 Aquarius. So it was kind of bringing these three charts very much, bringing the three charts together. Now, and one other thing about Victoria Nuland is that, like Syrskyi and Zelensky, Victoria Nuland has the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I think one might argue that because of Victoria Nuland's intervention in Ukraine, okay, it probably wasn't just her, but because as a result of her intervention, or partly as a result of that intervention of America, the US engineering the fall of an elected president, that led to Russia annexing the Crimea, and it led to this whole civil war situation in the Donbass, and of course, directly or indirectly, hundreds of thousands of people died. Most of them Ukrainian rather than Russian, and so Victoria Nuland is part of this drama. And Victoria Nuland, she has the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So let's just show you her midpoints. So there's her Aries point, and there you can see Aries. She has Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So that's quite an interesting connection. One final point, of course, Princess Diana, who was born on July the 1st, 1961, same day as Victoria Nuland, also had Aries on a Mars-Saturn midpoint. But for her, it worked in a different way. Death was very much part of her. And I suppose Princess Diana dying in the tunnel was a manifestation of that Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. The Aries is a world at large. But rather than lots of people dying, it was her dying in such a way that the whole world saw it. Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So this is actually an example of two people having the same astrological configuration, Aries on a Mars-Saturn midpoint, but it working in two very different ways. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on the subject of Ukraine. I have, as usual, gone on for far too long, and I really didn't want to talk about Ukraine, and so I'm really going to try to avoid the subject of Ukraine in future videos for as long as possible. So I will try. I really will try. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me for so long. If you're still with me, I hope you found that video interesting, or at least useful. If you did find the video interesting or useful or enjoyable, then I'd be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, then of course I'd be grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.